And welcome everybody to eGov for 2018. I am Spiro Kenton. I'm your host for the event. And we are thrilled you have actually populated this room and joined us today as we explore all the ways government and private industry can work together alongside each other to utilize innovation more efficiently. You're getting ready for the most exciting speaker lineup to date. Before I introduce our first speakers, I have to thank our sponsor and give them some love. They're an integral part to the success of this year's event. Very special thank you to our presenting sponsor, SAP. You'll see a lot of the SAP logo in eGov going on today. If you haven't done so already, please download the eMerge Americas app. All you have to do is search for eMerge Americas, that's one word, on your iPhone or Android device. We'll also invite you to share your favorite eGov Summit moments via social media using the hashtag eMerge18 and at eMerge Americas. Got that down? So now, without any further ado, please help me welcome United States House of Representative member Congressman Carlos Curbelo, University of Miami President Dr. Julio Frenk, as well as our moderator for this one, he's a great one, journalist and anchorman, a Miami kid, Jose Diaz-Balart for Telemundo.
Morning. Good afternoon, I should say by now, right? How are you? Gentlemen, sit down. What a pleasure to see you all. You know, I think we can say that inside it's eMerge, top technology. Outside, getting to park is from the 18th century. What a dichotomy and a difference, right? Inside than outside. Gentlemen, thank you for being with us. And look, I think this conversation should be fluid. And if you guys want to be a part of it, we're more than happy to share the opportunity to have a conversation. And I think we should start, and if each one of you would kind of give me your thoughts on, we were just hearing this morning about the future of leadership and how leaders need to apply and adapt to innovation. Congressman, there also is the public-private partnerships that exists. How do you forge leadership in the future when we really don't know what the future has as far as technology and what some of the biggest challenges are for people as they go forward in a career?
Well, thank you, Jose, and it's wonderful to be here at eMerge, and to share the stage with Dr. Frenk, the president of my twice alma mater, undergrad and graduate. So thank you for this opportunity. And Jose, I think probably the best way to encourage effective leadership in this time of dynamic change is to encourage people to be open-minded and understand that the solutions of 5 years ago, the solutions of 10 years ago may in some ways be obsolete. We here in Miami-Dade County, and I experienced it this morning, have a major transportation challenge. And you know, many of us believe that we need to build out transit and expand metro rail, and that may be true, but there are also other solutions that we're just starting to imagine. Autonomous vehicles and what that means and how that can help with traffic flows. They might be more cost effective. Sure, there's some risks associated with it, but what I'd always tell my colleagues in leadership positions is we have to keep an open mind, because the world that we grew up in really no longer exists in many ways, and we just have to be open to the new technologies and to the new solutions that can help us address some old problems.
You know, it was amazing. It was fascinating. I don't know if you saw Mark Zuckerberg just a couple of weeks ago, both in front of the Senate and the House. And it seemed, Congressman, that it was not only two different eras speaking, but it was as if they were speaking two different languages at times.
Two different worlds.
It seems as though,
entirely.
you know, and the legislature is functioning in a different It's kind of like the parking and eMerge, right? Legislatures seem to not get it.
Well, that's right. And this is a major problem because obviously there's a great tension that exists, and I think is only going to get worse and more acute between technology, everything that comes with it, and an institution like Congress or the executive that isn't really equipped to process the new technologies and to regulate it in a way that's effective. And you have to find that perfect balance because you don't want to over-regulate. If we had over-regulation, we may not have the internet today, but you also don't want to be too loose in your regulatory framework because then you have people's private data being stolen. So this is the great challenge.
Dr. Frenk, talk to me about how one at an academic level prepares people to be successful entrepreneurs in a future you may not quite understand.
Well, thank you again, Jose, and I'm delighted to be back in eMerge, and the University of Miami is one of the partners here. Manny Medina has been just an incredible force for the transformation of the conversation in Miami about the future. I do think the future of Miami lies in innovation, and every single successful innovation hub in the world has a comprehensive research university at its core. And that's the role we want to play at the University of Miami. I'm also delighted to see Representative Curbelo. We're very proud of our alums, and he has been an extraordinary person in Congress. We do have that fundamental role as universities to create the mindset. The future doesn't happen, we make the future. The future is what we do. And one of the roles of universities is to carry out the research and the scholarship that allows us to anticipate trends and get ahead of the game.
How do you do that? How do you anticipate?
Well, we study reality. We try to understand. We create through the humanities frameworks for interpreting human experience. It's not just the scientific part. It's also the humanities and the social sciences that allow us to interpret the reality that we live. And then we try to translate that into both the technologies that we ourselves generate through our discoveries, but also in the way we innovate education. And I do think, to your question, that the big challenge we have is now to educate the future workforce to be successful in the most dynamic labor market in human history. Our students are graduating into a labor market where maybe a lot of what we teach them in very substantive, concrete terms is going to be rapidly obsolete. So we're trying to develop this idea of what some colleagues have called a T-shaped individual. Someone who is an expert, that's the vertical part, having depth in an area, because we do live in a society with a complex division of labor. You need to be good at something. But also the horizontal part, which is a number of competencies that will allow you to successfully navigate in a complex and rapidly changing labor market. Critical thinking, the ability to identify a problem, correctly diagnose it, and devise a strategy to address the problem. Numeracy, because we live in the world of big data, we all need to know how to interpret and work with data. Communication, verbal, oral communication, written communication, increasingly visual communication. And something very important, ethical reasoning. The ability to systematically analyze the moral consequences of your choices. We're not just producing workforce, we're also producing the citizens of our society. But to the extent that we can actually develop those set of competencies that everyone that goes through a university needs to master, then I think that's that plus creativity is what's going to allow them to be successful.
That point that you said about the ethics, and I think that I'd like to kind of hone in on that in the middle, but in a minute. But we see the head of the Miami-Dade School Board, Dr. Curbelo, is here. Thank you for being here, sir. One of the many things that he's done successfully is one of the schools in the Miami-Dade school system, public school system, that he actually started, came up with the concept, is eSchool, right? It's essentially all, future school. There's iPads. Every kid has an iPad. They do their work all through the the internet, and they're prepared at an early age to deal with the future. And I know that you do that in many ways in the University of Miami. But it seems as though kids, and I know I have a daughter who's 13 and one who's 10, knows much more about technology than I do. I think that happens to all of us, right?
My 5 and 8-year-old do too.
Know already more than we do. How do you, I guess, chisel at someone who is so used to immediacy, so used to technology being at their service, don't know what research is, for example, because all they have to do is Google things and it appears, and ethics behind it. I see it in my, sphere of work, how there can be a lot of journalism and fake journalism, and sometimes they try to blend those two together. How do you work on the ethics aspect of technology?
Well, and again, I also salute the innovations because we are dependent on that pipeline from K to 12. This is the students we get. So I applaud Commissioner Curbelo for actually being that force of innovation in the K through 12. That's what we are depending on. It is true that the millennials most likely have different learning strategies than the traditional ones. The good news is that after a 20th century where education was probably one of the very few sectors that did not experience a technological revolution for whatever reason. I mean, compared to medicine, in the 20th century, we more than doubled life expectancy, drugs, vaccines, equipment, compared to transportation. Even with the problems with parking. Compare it to almost to communications. Education didn't experience a technological revolution. We are undergoing that technological revolution today. The other big factor fueling the educational revolution is advances in cognitive science that allow us to understand better how people learn. And whether it's ethical reasoning or any of the other competencies, one thing we know is that it's immersive experiences that generate the best learning, and that it's not the traditional paradigm where you first studied theory and then you applied it. It's actually the way in which being immersed in a practical situation allows you then to step back and then elaborate the theory. And I believe that technologies now, which are highly interactive, allow us to do that. We at the university just opened a few months ago a whole hospital, which is a simulation hospital, which allows at the School of Nursing and Health Studies, allow the future professionals to actually be immersed through scripted experiences, which include ethical deliberation about choices that need to happen.
I want to stick with the ethical reasoning, and Congressman Curbelo, you just were at the Summit of the Americas in Peru recently, discussing common policy issues, ways to bring progress to the region. What can governments do to foster businesses? And when you see the difficulties that there are in Latin America, I mean, look, we're just seeing Nicaragua, that in these last days, unfortunately, the government has cracked down violently on people who simply wanted to express their opinions, closing down. What do they close down? Radio stations, TV stations, and all kinds of publications. That we've seen in Latin America a lot.
Yeah, and this emphasis on ethics, I think, is so critical, because look at what's happening in Nicaragua. And it just goes to show that no matter how powerful technology is, if you don't have ethical leaders, if you don't have leaders who refuse to engage in corruption, in diminishing democratic institutions, eventually it all blows up, and technology cannot cure that. It can help. It can help hold leaders accountable, but at the end of the day, Daniel Ortega for years has been eroding at the democratic institutions in Nicaragua. The corruption has been rampant.
Look what
and finally
Venezuela
there was
has
a social explosion.
Look what Venezuela has become. Look what Cuba has been doing for 60 years.
So we cannot rely on technology as a panacea. And by the way, the big theme of the Summit of the Americas this year was not just Venezuela, which is obviously a focal point in the region for all things bad and wrong, but anti-corruption. and really building those institutions in Latin America that can protect investors. Because what happens is these governments become corrupt, they start usurping power, there's violence, instability, and investors flee. So as much promise as there exists in technology, at the end of the day, we still need men and women to do the right thing, and that's something I think we cannot lose sight of, even in this beautiful hall where we're surrounded in this gulf of technology and of wonder and of promise. At the end of the day, we still need to educate, and we have two of the great educators here with us today, men and women who will do the right thing under tough circumstances.
You know, thinking about just the Nicaragua situation, Venezuela, that has done so much to try to control the access to information of its people. But it seems as though once there is a net of technology in a society, it's much more difficult for governments to control things. You see that the difference between Cuba, that was the Castro government has been in control since before technology really kind of became mainstream, and they're much more successful in controlling information. But how do you, in Latin America, foster that freedom when sometimes it's at the opposite interest of the government of that country?
Well, this is an area where the United States has to lead, and I know in recent months and years, well, I think the short answer is no, that the United States for decades now, I tell people that since the Reagan administration, there really hasn't been a committed, deep engagement in the region. And of course, now we're seeing other actors come in, the Chinese and the Russians, who are trying to fill that vacuum. But it takes American leadership to help a lot of these countries get on their feet. And the example is in Colombia. There you have a perfect example of what American engagement and leadership can mean for a country. This was a failed state, Jose, just 18 years ago. A lot of people thought Colombia was over, that it had been handed over to the FARC, to the guerrilla. The United States started Plan Colombia under President Clinton, and it was continued under Presidents Bush and Obama. And today, Colombia is on the verge, and they have a big election coming up.
Yes, they do.
But they're on the verge of being one of the great, stable economic powerhouses of Latin America, the same way Chile is, for example. So our country's participation throughout the world, but I think specifically in our region here in the Americas, is not just necessary, but vital if this region is going to thrive.
Interesting, you were talking about President Reagan's push towards Latin America.
And granted, sometimes his engagement was a little too
controversial.
aggressive, but I would say better to engage than not.
I was reminded that the last immigration reform of substance was also during the Reagan administration. I cannot believe that it's been so many decades since there was comprehensive immigration reform. And comprehensive immigration reform, by the way, does create opportunity for millions of people to contribute to this country. You know, everybody talks about Miami as the capital of Latin America. I have a friend of mine who was here visiting some time ago, and we were driving, and he said, when I get back to the States, the first thing I'm going to do, I go, no, you're in the States, lo que pasa que no parece. So how do we, and Dr. Frenk, let's talk about that. How do we make this community the center of innovation and the ideal place for the Americas to see this as a hub of technology and of the future?
I think there's a huge potential there. But let me just say something very briefly about the previous conversation on Latin America. Universities also play the role of serving to convene and unite. And I want to tell you that participating in eMerge, we have the rectors and presidents of 10 universities, all the way from Canada to South America, from Canada, from the United States, from Mexico, from Costa Rica, from the Caribbean, from Colombia, from Chile, from Brazil. participating here, we're exploring ways of facilitating mobility among students. Students go to university at the same age at which they become citizens. And I think if we can promote more common experiences among students, like the Erasmus project did in Europe, which served to really develop what is today the European Union, if we can facilitate that kind of mobility, I think we can do enormous.
Do you think that's possible in Latin America, with Venezuela, with Cuba, with
Not all of it, but I think, not all of it, of course, and just like it wasn't all of Europe at the beginning. But I think it's the power of young people at exactly the age in which they become citizens, sharing an educational experience to demolish all the prejudices, all the stereotypes, and find out that actually, we all have similar aspirations. It's something that you build from the bottom up, and it's a major role that universities can play. Universities have been historically what I call exemplary institutions that can set an example. And that's a way of promoting ethical behavior. If we ourselves embrace those values and exhibit them in our daily interactions, then we can set an example for the rest. And this is similarly in terms of cooperation. This is an initiative called the Hemispheric University Consortium, going all the way from Canada to the southern tip of South America. And I have great expectations. Similarly, and that's why the rectors and presidents of these 10 universities are convening in eMerge, with technological innovation. I think all of us, and we will be having a panel later today at 2 p.m., all of us are promoting innovation. If you think about it, every single innovation that has improved productivity or quality of life since World War II, every single one of them, whether it's antibiotics or the internet, every one of them has originated in basic research, the vast majority of which was carried out in a university. Universities are an integral part of the economy and of our communities. We're not the ivory towers. I think Miami has this privileged position of being really at the crossroads of the Americas. And we have an initiative called the Hemispheric Innovation Hub. The idea that if we can mobilize the business community, the civic community, and government, and mobilize the enormous amount of talent there is in Latin America today and the Caribbean, and make Miami a point of convergence, a hub where you can find the startup culture, the venture capital, the advice on commercializing discoveries, and the marketing potential that you have. This can be a next new step in the development of Miami. I think it's a natural advantage for Miami because of its geographic location at the crossroads of the Americas.
How do you see yourself and what role you can play? Not only as a born and raised South Floridian, but also as a member of Congress currently in the majority.
Well, Jose, and you brought up immigration, and I thank you because I know for the tech community, it's an issue that's important, not just economically, because you're right, it's very good for the economy to have talented people from all over the world to come to Miami, bring their ideas, bring their innovations, but also culturally. I think the tech community really is embracing people who come from different parts of the world and from different cultures. And I'll tell you, I was with the president on Thursday. He visited my district, and I told him numerous times that the most important thing Congress can do from now until the end of the year is get that elusive immigration deal done, a solution that provides permanence for DACA recipients, and others, TPS recipients, big deal for us here in Miami, and that, of course, helps reform our immigration laws as well, strengthen border security. I think most Americans agree with that. But this is an issue that has been debated for at least 12 years in Congress. President George W. Bush was the first who really stepped forward and said, let's get this done. It's since 1986,
Unsuccessfully.
It hasn't gotten done.
Unsuccessfully, 2010, the DREAM Act, unsuccessful. Anything that seems to be on immigration, it seems to be popular to be unsuccessful so that both the Democrats and the Republicans can run on saying how differently they would do things if they were in power, and then when they're in power, they say, it's the other guys that don't let me do it.
And that's exactly right. And we can all applaud to that because it's the absolute truth.
So what
I
are you
will
doing,
tell
Frenk?
you this.
So what are you doing?
We are the closest we've ever been since this debate started in about 2006. And
We're close now?
We're as close as we have ever been. There are more Republican and Democratic votes in the Congress today for a solution than ever before. The question is the same one. Can we overcome two important and powerful subgroups within the parties? Republicans who just don't see it our way. They're intransigent when it comes to this issue. They don't want to compromise. And Democrats who say the right things, but when it comes time to vote to cut a deal, they walk away because they want to keep this issue alive for the next campaign. So those are the two forces that we're working against, and we're trying to build a coalition from the middle out to capture as many people as possible. I still remain hopeful that we can get this done. And of course, it's an economic issue. Our economy is growing in this country. We're blessed that unemployment is at a record low, that wages are finally rising, more jobs are being created. It means we need people. We need people to fill those jobs, and we also need consumers so that firms can sell their products too. So this is very important as an economic policy, but again, also as a cultural policy and a statement about who we are as a people. Some of the anti-immigrant rhetoric that we've heard in this country for too long now is starting to have a real economic impact. I've been traveling over the last few weeks, and our State Department officials tell me throughout the world that some people are making the decision, the choice to not visit the United States.
Sure.
Because of the rhetoric that's out there. So we need to heal our society very quickly, and this is an issue that would be conducive to that.
And we are seeing, similarly to your last comment, in higher education. Higher education depends on the free movement of ideas, but many people don't know that there's 1 million foreign students studying every year in the United States.
1 million.
1 million. They generate about $34 billion in economic activity. Most of those students pay full tuition and help to subsidize the tuition of American students. And 300,000 of those are Chinese, about 180,000 are from India. We in the University of Miami have students from 110 countries. And we're so worried now.
From Latin America, Doctor, what percentage do you have from Latin America?
We have a very large percentage.
Yeah.
Our largest group in absolute numbers is from China, like in every other, but the second group is from Brazil. We have now many from Venezuela. Every time there's a political crisis, we are able to house here, or during the hurricane Irma and Maria, we extended our facilities for people who were affected, students and professors, researchers, so that they could come to University of Miami. But we're very worried about trade imbalances. This is one industry, because when a student comes here, that's a form of export of an American product. It's not the export you move, it's the consumer who moves here. But it is technically an export. And this is one where the trade balance for the United States is overwhelmingly favorable. But we're starting to see a lot of those students now going to Canada, to Australia, to European universities that teach in English. And this would be a disaster for American higher education.
Have you seen that? You've actually seen that very real change.
The number of applications nationally is going down from international students, not in our university, because we did a very proactive campaign to tell students from all over the world that they are most welcome here in Miami, and because Miami is a welcoming city. It's such a diverse city that it is easy to feel at home here. But the rhetoric has a potential for hurting one of the most balanced aspects of America's trade, which is higher education, where it's hugely favorable. And then those students also, once they graduate, the vast majority go back. They're the best ambassadors for the US because they have received a great education here. Many stay here and are the top people that then go on to become faculty members, inventors, executives in companies, etc. So I do think it's time the words do matter, and I think we're seeing some sectors where, as Representative Curbelo was saying where this could have an impact.
And Congressman, you've been pretty forthright about criticizing when, for example, the president has, of the, I don't know, a couple hundred tweets he does a day, you have actually said, listen, this is unacceptable. But words do matter. And when it does affect people's decisions to come to a place like South Florida or the University of Miami, where they could become much more productive members of society, whether it be here or their own, and they choose not to, it has a long-term effect on all of us.
It does, and I think the lesson is not only is it wrong for people to express themselves in such ways that exclude others or diminish others, but there's a real economic cost.
That's
to it.
right.
And we've seen it on immigration, on tourism to the United States, on the applications of foreign students who want to come here to learn. And we're also starting to see it when it comes to international trade. This is a community, South Florida, where we are the gateway to the Americas, gateway into the United States, the gateway out towards Central and South America. And I understand that it makes sense to revisit some of our trade policies, our trade agreements. The Chinese, for sure, have not been good actors on the stage of international trade, but it's important that the rhetoric and the policies to correct this be targeted at the bad actors and that they don't hurt our friends and allies, for example, Canada and Mexico, who we trade with so much every single day. And there's so many jobs here in South Florida and Miami that depend on this activity. So again, we shouldn't express ourselves in these ways. We shouldn't use social media to do it. I got off social media for Lent. It was a wonderful experience. Everyone should try it for at least a week. But let's use these tools for good, to better the world, not to divide the world.
I think that's a perfect way of wrapping up this afternoon. I do think that, and when we think about technology and the differences, I was struck by, and I think we could all probably consider this, the Mexican presidential debate yesterday. Did anybody see it?
Yeah, I did.
I think that among the many solutions given was El Bronco, who, among the other things he said that he's very pro-technology, and as a president, the solution would be to answer every WhatsApp message he gets as president, personally.
Good luck.
So something for you, Congressman, to consider, as well as you, Dr. Frenk, as well as all of you. Thank you very much. Thank you, gentlemen, for this wonderful opportunity.
Let's hear it. Representative Carlos Curbelo, UN President Julio Frenk, and Emmy Award-winning journalist and anchorman for Telemundo, Jose Diaz-Balart.